I am a neuroscientist by training, and I moved away from the bench and went to work as a research administrator in the federal government. I worked for the Defense Department overseeing a research network called the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, 17 sites stretching across the country. Lots of good work going on, but lots of pain points that are associated with research and multi-site trials. I came across blockchain around the time that Debbie Bucci in the Health and Human Services Office of the National Coordinator held a white paper contest in 2016. Reading through those papers really opened my eyes to the pain points that could be solved, not just in research, but even beyond in healthcare. And I've been working ever since, both within government and now having left government, to really promote the acceptance and experimentation that it's going to take to move this technology, this new tool forward in the world of healthcare and the world of health research. My book chapter is specifically on research, and as a researcher and as a former research administrator, I know the complexities of research and I understand the different stakeholders. So for me it was a great honor and a lot of value to be able to explore that for this book. I wanted to look at the value proposition that blockchain can bring to each of those different stakeholders. Scientists like to have science be right. It is finding the truth. It is the foundation of knowledge of our society. But oftentimes science can drift away and from that ideal, and you end up with irreproducible science. Almost 20% of biomedical science that's funded in the United States each year is not reproducible, and cleaning that noise up and getting more signal is something that's important to scientists, and I think blockchain in several ways can help with that. As a research administrator, a former research administrator, I have seen that getting more return on investment, more bang for your buck from those research funding dollars is of very big importance, not just to the funders, but to the taxpayers behind it. I think that blockchain can serve as a new tool in a lot of ways to bring cheaper research to the overall effort by reducing some of the overall cost in administrative ways, but also by reducing that same noise and giving us more bang for the buck when it comes to moving research into product or into knowledge product for better evidence-based medicine. Finally, what I like to call faster miracles or faster medical miracles is the key value for blockchain. It takes 17 years to go from bench to bedside, to improve care, to have new treatments get into the hospitals, and that's too long. Anyone who's ever had somebody suffering or dying knows that that's way too long. If lost it, sorry. Anybody who's ever had the experience of wanting to find a cure for something faster knows that 17 years is just too long. So one of the big values that blockchain can bring is to speed or accelerate that process up. And that can happen at a very low-level administrative level. And we've heard from Jose Arrieta at Health and Human Services describing how some administrative functions can be sped up with blockchain. But it also can be used as a tool for tracking contribution in science, and contribution in science is key. The intellectual property is key in the career tracks of science, and by making individuals comfortable that their knowledge input is being tracked, you'll be able to have a lot more data sharing a lot more quickly. Well, the biggest pressing issue that I see is the reproducibility crisis in science. There is a tremendous amount of effort in science, but there's a lot of misaligned incentives to get publications out, to get things into product in that form that maybe don't have the best quality to move forward evidence-based medicine. And cleaning up that reproducibility crisis is something that is very challenging because it takes a very expensive and extensive effort to change the practice of a lot of aspects of science, from where it's done in the academic setting to how it's evaluated from a programmatic level at a funder like NIH, to how it interacts with the ever-growing publication realm of science. one of the ways that blockchain can help is by creating an auditable record, not of the data itself, but of the data's transactions, to understand what has happened with that data, what type of methodology went into the collection of that data, is it mergeable with other data sets, what types of analyses and what types of interpretations were done and by whom and when. These types of metadata tracking of what happened during the process of creating science into knowledge, into publications, into clinical practice guidelines will become something that can be auditable very quickly and very cheaply if we've got a distributed ledger solution involved. And I think that that value could be huge. This is not a tool that gives us the ability to something we couldn't do now, but it changes the value proposition for doing it. And there is research that has shown if people's data choices and analysis choices with their data is auditable, they're a little more careful. There's not outright fraudulent science in many instances. It's simply just a little bit moving too quickly and a little bit of sloppiness and too much noise in the system that can be cleaned up with blockchain. Me is what I wrote in a brief essay back in early 2017 when I said science will be blockchained by 2025. Making that bold statement was really more of a motivation to get this introduced to the scientific community, because once we hit a certain threshold, I think it begins a cascade of no longer tolerating data that isn't auditable, isn't mergeable with clear understanding of all the methodology details that went into it, and isn't clean in a way that just is not always the case now. That new standard that blockchain can bring, that speed that blockchain can bring, that mergeability of data that blockchain can bring, and really that speeding up of that 17 years from bench to bedside and giving us better treatments and better outcomes for patients is what I'm very much looking forward to.
So where do you think we are in terms of maturity for blockchain in healthcare?
I think it's an array of maturities, because some applications in healthcare are similar to fintech. And those in the insurance industry will probably move faster. I think some are at a moderate maturity level, similar to supply chain advances outside of healthcare. Supply chain advances inside of blockchain, be it medical devices or pharma, are going to be moving forward a little bit behind some of the fintech, a little bit behind some of the fintech-like applications, but definitely before some of the more advanced one, like an electronic health record system. But I think that the maturity level in science is very low from an adoption standpoint, but stands to be accelerated very, very quickly. Because if you think of scientific data as nothing more than a product going through a very extended supply chain, the analysis is just processing like we would process produce into something that goes to the shelf, and then the eventual move towards a clinical practice guideline that is evidence-based with that scientific data and that scientific knowledge becomes like the food that you're bringing to your table. Thinking about it in that way, I think there are lessons to be learned from the supply chain applications that could really accelerate the application in science once scientists understand the value proposition, once federal funding agencies and other funding agencies understand the return on investment that it can bring, and once people as a whole become comfortable with what it can do to accelerate science, accelerate knowledge, and accelerate improved outcomes across healthcare. For the researchers, this process is going to need you. I hope that my chapter has given you an inroads into understanding it a little bit better, but a lot of this is very nascent, and a lot of this is only going to work if the researchers are involved. No one's going to be likely to build a successful blockchain for any aspect of science without the involvement of the researchers who know the data, know the workflow, contribute their knowledge to the overall governance structure that goes into the protocol, including differences across disciplines and subdisciplines. What works for cardiology data may not work for neurology data. And so there's going to be a need for the involvement of the scientists. And I hope that this chapter brings more of those scientists interested into the table so that we can move this forward with their input and really advance the application of this tool.